Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you are watching this video lecture. In the earlier sessions related to the chapter of PGBP, we discussed various provisions related to the charging of income under this head, that is section 28, and deductions allowable under this head ranging from section 30 to section 37, and also disallowances mostly contained in section 40 series. After these very important provisions which are core for solving the problems that can be expected from this chapter, let us move on to some more provisions which are also remaining in this chapter. There may be special questions or cases from the following provisions, but still the core provisions always remain to be about allowances and disallowances. In other words, expenses allowed as deduction or not allowed as deduction, which we already discussed. But still, the following provisions have their own importance, particularly in terms of procedural aspects in real life, and not only that, even in the main question also, as an additional point, these questions can be, or these points can be raised. So let us continue with some more provisions of this head of income. One of them is contained in section 41. So section 41 is about deemed profits which are chargeable to tax. The concept of this already we have observed, there is nothing new in this, but only that all subsections of section 41 are just now arranged at one place. As far as the logic of the following provisions is concerned related to 41, it is already known. What are those things which are deemed to be profits of the year when they arise? First one is section 41 subsection 1, which is related to recovery against any deduction. What is deduction? That was already claimed in earlier years. What is recovery? That is happening now against any deduction that was claimed in the earlier years. So naturally, if at all any deduction was claimed earlier and that condition is now reversed by whatever means, that becomes taxable. That's what it is, nothing new. So how this works? Section 41(1), how it is going to work, what are the conditions related to that, let us observe them. First of all, there would have been any deduction that was claimed in the earlier years in respect of maybe a loss or an expenditure or a trading liability that was incurred by the SSE. Means prior to the current previous year, in the earlier years, some deduction was claimed by the SSE and it was allowed to the SSE earlier. But now what is happening? During the current year, that is our previous year, either the taxpayer or the SSE has obtained a refund of such trading liability by way of a remission or cessation thereof. These are the words to be used, if at all we use them in the notes concerning this application of the provision. What happened here now? The SSE during the current previous year has obtained a refund. How he obtained? By way of a remission or cessation thereof. Remission means a little bit of concession. Cessation means that liability itself ceased to exist. For example, if you take, say, last year, prior to the previous year, SSE has done some credit purchases. As an example, we are taking this. Let us say, earlier years, somewhere 1 or 2 years back, before the previous year, SSE purchased something on credit and he claimed a deduction on accrual basis because purchases was rightly debited to the trading account or profit and loss account and it was claimed as deduction. Nothing wrong with that in those years. But along with purchases, there was a liability that was created in the form of creditors. That is a trading liability, which the SSE has created then, against which he claimed the deduction in that year. Let us say now, during the current previous year, the creditor of the SSE has given some concession or a remission. Let us say he gave a discount, cash discount, while paying the amount to the creditor. Maybe already the SSE has delayed his payment a long time, so the creditor is also vexed up. Just an example, not that it will happen. And creditor said, Baba, you pay 50% enough, I'll consider it is okay, done deal. Then SSE happily paid 50% only, that's okay. But the point is what? Earlier he claimed a deduction for the entire purchases what he has done. But now when it comes to the squaring off of the liability or meeting the liability, he has not met the full liability. He obtained a remission. So what happens now? Imagine earlier he purchased goods worth 1 lakh rupees for which he has claimed deduction earlier. Now when it comes to final payment, he is paying only 50,000 rupees. What happened to the remaining 50,000? That is a remission that he is now enjoying as a refund of such trading liability. So what should happen to that? Naturally that becomes taxable in the year in which such remission has happened. On the other side, whether if that liability ceased to exist now, then also the same logic. Entire 1 lakh, let us say, the creditor has got vanished and he said we cannot trace him now. Let us say SC wants to pay but is not there, the creditor is gone somewhere. Then that entire liability got ceased to exist now, for which we already claimed a deduction earlier. So now what should happen? That entire amount should become taxable. That is about remission or cessation. Or sometimes it could be in the form of a real refund in the form of cash or kind. That is also possible in another scenarios where SC has spent some money and gave money to somebody else earlier, and for that expenditure or loss he claimed deduction already. Now he is getting it back. Money is now refunded. Classic example for that can be the recovery of bad debts. Example, bad debts was a loss which was claimed earlier. Now he has obtained a refund of that. That is also possible in terms of a loss. Likewise, for any such loss or expenditure or trading liability for which he has claimed deduction in earlier years, but now that liability got either reduced or that got ceased to exist, or the SSE got some refund of that. In any case, the original situation got reversed now, which means the amount of benefit what the SSE is getting in the current year, that is our previous year, will become taxable. That's it. So that's what this provision says. If the above two conditions are satisfied, the amount obtained by such person shall be deemed to be the profit and gains of business or profession, and accordingly chargeable to tax as income of that previous year. In which year the refund is actually received, or in which year the remission or cessation has actually happened. But another point to note here is, this rule is applicable even if business does not exist in the year of recovery. Not necessary that SSE should be carrying on the business when he got this refund. Even the business has ceased to exist also, still this rule is applicable. Logically speaking, similar to 25A related to income from house property, where arrears of rent, past arrears of rent or past unrealized rent received now, recovered now, will become taxable in the year of receipt, irrespective of the fact whether the SSE was owner of the property or not. Same way, here also, past deduction claimed earlier, now that is reversed, which means it becomes taxable, irrespective of whether the SSE is continuing his business during the previous year or not. That is a very generic rule, 41 subsection 1, and the logic of entire 41 is always the same. Ultimately it is the same. Even if you look at 41.3, sale of assets used for scientific research, we already looked at that. What happens when a capital asset which was used for scientific research is sold without having been used for the purpose, and sale proceeds together with the amount of deduction allowed under section 35 exceeds the amount of capital expenditure incurred on purchase of such asset, which means whenever the sale proceeds exceed the amount of original purchase price, then that will be chargeable to tax under under capital gains. But to the extent of deduction which was allowed already, that will be chargeable to tax as business income in the year in which the sale took place. Simple. Logic is same. How much deduction was claimed earlier? That has to be first looked at. Whatever deduction was claimed, that will become taxable. So what if the sale price exceeds that amount of deduction itself or amount of expenditure itself? Then the excess over the purchase price will be always capital gain. That will be chargeable to tax under the head of capital gains. But as far as PGBP is concerned, whatever deduction claimed earlier shall now become taxable as PGBP in the year in which the sale took place. That's it. What will be taxable? The sale price or the amount of deduction claimed earlier, whichever is lower, will become taxable. That's all. Under PGBP, that is the amount that is taxable. Sale price or the amount of deduction allowed earlier, whichever is lower. That is taxable under section 41(3) as deemed profits. Then 41(4) is again same as we already discussed this also. Recovery of bad debts. Nothing new. Where any bad debt was allowed as deduction earlier and amount is subsequently recovered on such debt that is greater than the difference between debt and the deduction so allowed, the excess realization is chargeable to tax as business income of the year in which such debt is recovered. We already discussed this while understanding the deduction allowed for bad debts under section 36. There itself we had a formula also. How much will be taxable? Amount recovered now minus of the original bad debts and minus deduction allowed. So bad debts minus deduction allowed first of all should be calculated. That amount should be reduced from the recovery. That becomes taxable in the year of recovery of such debt. All these three things are actually logically known to us already. Nothing new in them. We have applied them also in particular circumstances also already. Only 41(1) used a new word that has to be remembered: remission or cessation of a trading liability. That is the only new thing. Other than that, remaining things are known. Now 41(5) is not actually about any taxability, but it is giving a facility of carry forward of the losses and setting off against the incomes that are received under 41(1), 3 or 4. So this is about set off related provision, because normally a business loss cannot be carried forward after 8 years. But that is an exception under 41(5), wherein the loss which might be related to long back, even before 8 years also, can be set off against the incomes that are earned in the form of 41(1) or 41(3) or 41(4). So what would have happened here? What situation is this 41(5) telling us? 1. The business would have been discontinued already. 2. Loss of such business is pertaining to the year in which it is discontinued, and it could not be set off against an income of that year. When the business was discontinued, there was a loss, but that could not be set off in that year's income. That means that loss has lapsed. Since business itself is discontinued, there is no way that the SC can carry forward and set off against any incomes in future. So that business loss was lapsed when the business was discontinued, and that business should not be a speculative business. If all these conditions are satisfied, and after the discontinuation of such business or profession, if there is a receipt which is deemed as business income, as discussed above under 41(1), 3 or 4, that loss which could not be set off earlier in the year of discontinuation can be set off now against these deemed profits. In other words, these deemed profits can be used for setting off the losses that happened during the year of discontinuation of business. That's it. That is section 41(5). Once again, a special case, particular MCQ only is possible here. These are all logical things. But yes, bad debts recovered is a very common point in problems also. Same way, while applying whether a particular item is taxable or deductible, when we apply the provisions, simultaneously we have to also apply some logic, some common sense. If any item was earlier allowed as deduction, now if there is any recovery of that or reversal of that, that becomes taxable. If any amount was not allowed as deduction earlier, how can there be any taxability now? That doesn't make sense. Same way, if any amount is not at all allowed as deduction in the first place, the refund of that cannot be taxed. That doesn't have any logic of getting it taxed. But these cases are not that. These cases are where a deduction was claimed earlier and now such situation got reversed, hence those become taxable in the year of such reversal. I am telling general thing. What is that reversal? That could be a remission or a cessation or a refund or a sale of scientific research asset or recovery of bad debts. All of them are reversal of original condition only. But when the reversal happened, those become taxable in the year of such reversal. That is a underlying thread that we have to understand from all these deemed profits related provisions. Of course, another facility that is given by law is, if there are deemed profits, they can be used to set off the business losses incurred in the year of discontinuation of the business, much prior to 8 years also, that can be now used to set off against these deemed profits. That is a facility available to the SSEs if such a situation occurs. What is the situation? There should be a discontinuation, there should be a loss arising in the year of discontinuation which could not be set off, because after that there is no business itself, and that business should not be a speculative business. If all these conditions are satisfied, such losses which could not be set off in the year of discontinuation can be set off now against the deemed profits which have occurred during the previous year. That was 41(5). Now there are two more small variety type provisions which can be also possible to be asked as small MCQs. One of them is 43A. Changes in the rate of exchange of currency. When an SSE acquires an asset from abroad, means purchasing it with some foreign currency, and due to the variation in the exchange rates, naturally when we say foreign currency, there will be some variation in the exchange rates. But because of that variation in the exchange rates, if the liability of the SSE increases or decreases, both are possible. If there is an exchange rate gain, then liability might decrease. If there is an exchange rate loss, the liability might increase. Then the same shall be adjusted in the actual cost of the asset in the year of payment, irrespective of the method of accounting followed by the SSE. In other words, when there is a exchange rate fluctuation, because of that exchange rate fluctuation, if there is any loss or gain, let us say, that loss or gain should be adjusted in the actual cost of the asset. What should be happening to the loss? Naturally, that should be added to the cost of asset. What should be happening to the gain? That should be reduced from the cost of asset. That's it. And that adjustment should happen in the year of settlement of that liability, irrespective of the method of accounting followed by the SSE, means cash or accrual basis, that doesn't matter. But one point we have to identify here and remember is, if there was an asset already purchased and amount paid also in foreign currency, it is not going to have any impact on the liability because there is no liability. Sometimes people get mistaken. Wherever there is foreign currency, always there is a fluctuation, they think. Not necessary, right? If you have done a spot settlement of payment for purchase of asset from abroad, done deal. Already purchased and you know what was your cost. That is the actual cost. No adjustment required. But on the other side, if you purchased the asset but you did not settle the payment to the vendor yet, or you settled only part of that and part of that is still remaining, that means you have a liability. Along with the asset, you also have a liability. And now the simple logic is your liability is changing. Why is it changing? The liability in foreign currency will not change. The liability in Indian rupees will change because of the exchange rate fluctuations between foreign currency and Indian currency. And because of that change in liability, what should we do? Simple logic is we also should change the value of asset. Simple. Means we should adjust that exchange rate fluctuation, whether gain or loss, to the actual cost of the asset. When should we do that? In the year of payment. These changes may happen till the amount is settled. So when the amount is actually settled, what is your real gain or loss? That will be adjusted in the actual cost of the asset according to 43A. Let us look at a small example for understanding this provision. Narang Textiles Limited purchased a machinery from Germany for 1 lakh euros on 3rd September 2018, not during our previous year, prior to that, through a term loan from Fortune Bank Limited. So they took a loan not of rupees, naturally of euros. If they took a loan of rupees already, it is done deal. We don't have any issue. They would have paid the machinery also then itself. But they should have taken this loan in euros because the machine was purchased in euros. Exchange rate on the date of acquisition was 65 rupees, and the SSC took a forward exchange contract on 5th October 2019, which is our year, when the rate specified in the contract was 67 rupees per, this is wrong, it should be euro, that's okay, because originally the machine was purchased for euro, so this should be also euro. So let us consider this as euro, right? So when it was purchased 65 rupees per euro, now it is 67 rupees per euro. Compute the depreciation for the assessment years 1920 and 2021. Ignore additional depreciation is asking. Okay, fine. So depreciation calculation normally will happen according to whatever the original purchase price. You take, for example, the purchase price in euros, which was 1 lakh euros. At the date of acquisition, the exchange rate was 65 rupees per euro. So what will be the purchase price naturally? That will be 65 lakhs. Okay. 65 lakhs is there. And that happened on 3rd September. That means for the assessment year 1920, because we are talking about machinery, 15% depreciation can be claimed on that. 65 lakhs into 15%. That means 9.75 lakhs to be depreciated in that year. So, what is going to be remaining now? 55.25 lakhs. Okay. That is the WDV at the beginning of the previous year 1920 for the assessment year 2021. Now what happened during the year? The SSC has taken a forward exchange contract, means already he has fixed his liability. He is not going to change more. He has already committed by taking a contract for 67 rupees per euro. That means his liability is not going to be more than 67 rupees per euro at all. Which automatically means there is a loss of 2 rupees per euro because his rupee liability is increasing, not decreasing. If you observe that 65 to 67, it has increased, it means the rupee got devaluated. That means that's a loss. How much is the loss? 1 lakh euros into 2 rupees. That loss is 2 lakhs. So what is this 43A telling is, because it is a loss, add it to the original cost of the asset. That's what it is telling. So if you add it to the original cost of the asset, then now depreciable amount will be how much? 57.25. And the question was asking about compute depreciation. So 57.25 into 15%. Answer now will be 8.5875. In other words, final answer here will be 8 lakhs 58,750. That is the depreciation for the year previous year 1920 or assessment year 2021. What was the depreciation for the assessment year 1920? That we already calculated, 9.75 lakhs, 9,75,000. For the current previous year, the depreciation is 8,58,750. That is the answer. But the point here to note is what we have done with the exchange rate loss. We have done an addition to the original cost of the asset because there is an exchange rate loss of 2 rupees per euro. Because the liability is about 1 lakh euros, that will result in a loss of 2 lakhs. That is added to the cost of the asset. That's all. That is the answer for this question. Such questions can be expected as MCQ or a point in a bigger question also possible. Now moving on to section 43CA. This is one section which is similar to another provision in the chapter of capital gains where we will apply it more, called section 50C. And this one, 43CA, is very similar to 50C. But only difference is what? In this case of application of 43CA, the SSE will have the land or building as stock in trade because his business is that. In 50C, the SSE will have land or buildings as capital asset. That is the only difference. So simply speaking, for which type of assets this 43CA will be applicable? Assets which are in the nature of land or building or both. In other words, real estate transactions, simply speaking. Real estate transactions. Land or building or both. That is the asset if the SSE transfers. Transfers means actually he is selling because he is holding those land and building as stock in trade. Naturally, for whom this 43CA will be applicable? For the real estate dealers or real estate companies, construction companies, for whom the land or building would be stock in trade. Big construction companies, developers, for them, whatever the buildings that they construct is stock in trade, right? And when they sell it for some price, no problem. But the point is, whatever they are telling that they received some consideration or accruing, earning some consideration because of the transfer of such asset which is land and building and which is not a capital asset other than capital asset. Why is it not a capital asset? Because it is stock in trade. If it is capital asset, same provision, just change the section number 50C, that will apply. Because it is not a capital asset, we are applying 43CA. Provision is same, logic is same. What the SSE is selling, land or building or both, simply real estate transactions. And for the SSE, in this case, that is a stock in trade and he sold that. He earned some money, he received some consideration or earned some consideration. But the point is, whatever the SSE says the sale value is less than the stamp duty value. So for every real estate transaction, it is compulsory for registration, and registration when you do, you have to pay stamp duty to the state governments. So state governments generally fix a kind of stamp duty valuation for each of the properties. For collecting stamp duty will be collected as a percentage of that stamp duty valuation. That is all related to state governments. We are not bothered about the stamp duty here. We are bothered about SSE telling that he sold the asset, but whatever the sale proceeds or sale consideration, he claims that it is less than the stamp duty value. Then, should we believe the SSE or should we believe the stamp duty value? 43CA says we will believe the stamp duty value because that will be deemed to be the full value of consideration. Stamp duty value is deemed to be the full value of consideration. Example, let us say SSE has sold an apartment, a building for 80 lakhs rupees. But stamp duty value of that building is 90 lakhs rupees. SSC actually sold for 80 lakhs. He's saying that. But stamp duty valuation of the same building is 90 lakhs rupees. That is not reality, that is stamp duty value. 80 lakhs is reality, or at least we have to think that it is reality, because SC is telling that he received 80 lakhs. But what the Income Tax Act says, I don't believe you. You are saying 80 lakhs, which is less than the stamp duty value. So I will not consider your claim to be correct. I would say you would have sold for any amount less than stamp duty value, I don't care. But I will consider stamp duty value as if it is the full value of consideration. So what will be the sale proceeds that should be taxable in this case? 80 lakhs or 90 lakhs? It should be 90 lakhs. Sir, it is unfair na? 43 CA says that. Unfair or fair? There is no point of that. 43 CA says, if the actual consideration to be claimed by SSE is less than the stamp duty valuation, then stamp duty valuation will be considered deemed as if it is the full value of consideration resulting from such transfer. Of course, there are some recourses available to the SSEs also. We will discuss them in detail when we come to 50C. But the core of 50C is already the same. When there is actual consideration and that is less than stamp duty value, we will not take actual consideration. Rather, we will take stamp duty value as if it is the full value of consideration. However, this provision is not applicable when the stamp duty value does not exceed 105% of the actual consideration. In other words, there is a deviation between actual consideration and stamp duty value, but that deviation is not more than 5%. Then it's okay. Then actual consideration can be taken as actual consideration, as full value of consideration. So, when this provision of 43CA will apply, wherein we will take stamp duty valuation into picture as if it is full value of consideration rather than taking actual consideration. It will be when the stamp duty value exceeds 105% of actual consideration. That means if the stamp duty value does not exceed 105% of actual consideration, then this provision is not applicable. In our earlier example, let us say 80 lakhs rupees was the actual consideration, and let us say the stamp duty value is 82 lakhs. 80 lakhs is actual consideration, stamp duty value is 82 lakhs. So should we take 82 lakhs as if it is the full value of consideration? Should we apply 43CA? Answer is no. Why? Because the stamp duty value did not exceed 105% of actual consideration. So 80 lakhs into 105% means up to 84 lakhs stamp duty value, we don't consider stamp duty value at all. So if the actual consideration is 80 lakhs as claimed by the SSE and stamp duty valuation is more than that, but 81 lakhs, 82 lakhs, 83 lakhs, 84 lakhs, even up to that 84 lakhs also stamp duty value, still we don't consider stamp duty value, we will take actual consideration only as if it is the full value of consideration. But imagine if the stamp duty valuation is 85 lakhs, then we have to take 85 lakhs because it has exceeded 105% of actual consideration. So when the stamp duty value does not exceed 105% of actual consideration, in our example up to 84 lakhs, that was an example, don't remember those numbers and all. If what you have to remember is 105%, means stamp duty value is not exceeding the actual consideration by more than 5%. If that is the case, then we don't apply 43CA, which means we don't even worry about stamp duty valuation. We just ignore that. We take whatever the SC says as actual consideration, that itself is taken as full value of consideration. That is 43CA. Of course, the application of this in a real detailed manner will be again there in the chapter of capital gains when we discuss section 50C later, because the essence is same. Essence is going to be same, provision is going to be same, but little more details will be added there, because that is more applicable in 50C as capital gains chapter than PGBP, because this section 43CA has to be applied only for one type of business. A normal trader and all, they cannot have all this 43CA. This is only for real estate companies, real estate businesses, construction companies, developers who have land or buildings as stock in trade. That means very less percentage of people are only getting this 43CA applicable to them. 43A also, those people who purchase assets from outside India in foreign exchange, that too not paying on the spot, paying later. If that is the situation, exchange rate fluctuation has to be adjusted with the actual cost of the asset. That is also a rare scenario, but for exam questions especially, that can be asked. So 43A and 43CA are two different variety sections which are applicable in exceptional cases, but quite possible to be asked as MCQs. 41 is a logical thing which is related to deemed profits, as we already know. With that, all the core provisions of PGBP, including taxabilities and all, are done. Now let us move on to other series of sections, that is 44 series. So we have 44AA, 44AB, 44AD, 44ADA and 44AE. This is all one separate discussion type we can understand and consider. Of course, each of them is different provision. Provision is different, purpose is different. Series, section number is 44, but you cannot just write 44 here. You have to remember the full section. So this one, 44AA, is about maintenance of books of accounts. So should the SSC maintain books of accounts or not? Answer is yes, but when? That conditions we have to just remember. Just very procedural thing. Of course, reality thing. You and I are not going to maintain any books of accounts in exams. SSCs will maintain in real life. But what we are going to decide, whether he is required to maintain or not, yes or no. So that type of MCQs or small questions can be definitely asked. So 44AA is about maintenance of books of accounts. So if the SSC is carrying on a business or a non-specified profession, so what is a non-specified profession? Other than the specified professions which are already there here. We will come to that later. Other than them, whatever the professions are there, those are non-specified professions or businesses. In that case, when an SSC is supposed to maintain the books of accounts, you have to just by heart this, there is nothing else. Just have to remember these conditions, that's it. When? If the profit from such business or profession exceeds 1,20,000, profit, that is profit. Or, not and or, turnover or gross receipts from that business exceed 10 lakhs rupees in any one of the years out of the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year. Any one of the years. Any 1 year out of the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year, if profit from such business has exceeded 1,20,000 or turnover exceeded 10 lakhs rupees, then SSC is definitely supposed to be maintaining books of accounts. These conditions you have to just remember. But this also has to be remembered simultaneously, that is point number 5. In case of individuals or HUF, the above limit is profit of 2,50,000 and turnover of 25 lakhs respectively. Because mostly our SSCs will be individuals, you better remember point 5 on priority when compared with points 1 and 2. So what is the condition we have to understand if at all the SSC is individual? If the SSC got a profit of more than 2,50,000 or a turnover of more than 25 lakhs in any 1 year out of the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year. So we are not bothered about previous year's turnover and previous year's profit. In any one of the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year, if the profit of the SSC has exceeded 2,50,000 or turnover of the SSC has exceeded 25 lakhs, he has to maintain books of accounts. What books of accounts? The law did not tell that. It only just said SC needs to maintain such books of accounts as may enable the assessing officer to compute his taxable income. So that's it. He has to maintain, that's all. What books of accounts particularly it was not mentioned. Of course, they have to maintain all the other things normally, like journal, ledger, those things will be there. Normally, whatever books of accounts are maintained, those have to be maintained by the SSC so that it will enable the assessing officer to compute his taxable income. That is the condition for 44AA. Based on turnover or profits related to 3 years immediately preceding the previous year. However, we have other two conditions also which will be related to the presumptive incomes that we are going to discuss later, related to 44AD or 44AE. BB we don't have in syllabus now, but still logic, if you understand, that is enough at this point, because anyway we are going to know what is presumptive income. Presumptive incomes are those where the Income Tax Act itself will tell how much is the income of the SSE, rather than computing the income by applying all the provisions of PGBP. For example, if a trader has a turnover of say 60 lakhs rupees, Income Tax Act will tell 8% of that is your profit, 4,80,000 is your profit, that is your PGBP. That's what it will tell in 44 AD. We will come to that. But name itself indicates that is presumptive income. Like that, different presumptive provisions are there where SSCs will have an option of having a straightforward calculation of their income rather than using all the provisions of PGBP, which we already know. So all the provisions of PGBP ultimately will become useless if SSC chooses presumptive income. According to Income Tax Act, there are some amounts that the law assumes to be the income of the SSC, profit of the SSC, under these provisions of 44 AD, ADA, AE, which we are going to discuss. BB we are not going to discuss since they are not in our syllabus. But the point is what? Law said 8% of your turnover is your profit. Is it real profit? No. Actual profit of the SSC could be more than that or less than that. Of course, if the actual profit of the SSC is more than that, then SC will be silent. Happily, he will take presumptive taxation and he will tell, okay, my income is 4,80,000, I will pay tax on that. But what if the SSC declared lower income than what was prescribed in the presumptive sections? Then what? Which means, according to the Income Tax Act, section 44 AD, for example, any presumptive income, 8% of the turnover is deemed to be the SSC's profit. If SSC agrees to that, there is no problem. He doesn't have to maintain any books of accounts. What if the SSC declares a lower income than prescribed under those presumptive incomes? Then the SSC has to maintain books of accounts under 44 AA. That is what point number 3 and 4 are mentioning. So, if the SSC declared any lower income other than that what has been specified in 44 AE or BB or BBB, then SSC has to prove it that his real income actually is lower than what was prescribed by law. How can he prove it without having books of accounts? Not possible. That is why 44 AE says he has to maintain books of accounts. On the other side, 44 AD also same logic. But in this case, books of accounts need to be maintained only if the SSC's income exceeds basic exemption limit. If SSC's income is not exceeding basic exemption limit, he says 2,50,000 is only my income, 2,20,000 is only my income, it is not exceeding basic exemption limit, then he doesn't need to maintain books of accounts. It's a very small amount. So, if the SSC claims to have an income of lower than what is prescribed in 44 AD and has that income more than basic exemption limit, then he has to maintain books of accounts under 44 AA. That is about businesses or non-specified professions. Need to remember these numbers. Third and fourth points are logical. There is nothing to separately remember. Because SC himself is claiming that his income is actually lower than what was prescribed by law, he has to prove that. You don't write all this in exam. He has to prove that and all. That is the logic. Logic should not be written. Provision has to be written. What is the logic is there? Because he has to prove that he has to maintain books of accounts. That is all why. Examination questions, no need why. They have to be answered with what is the provision. That's all. But fifth point and first and second point have to be remembered because numbers are there, limits are there. If the SC is an individual and having a profit of more than 2,50,000 or a turnover of 25 lakhs in any one of the years, in the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year, then SC has to maintain books of accounts. In other cases other than individuals and HUF, these limits are 1,20,000 and 10 lakhs. In general, we have individuals SCs, so fifth point is more relevant than 1 and 2. Remember that on priority. What if the SC does not fall in above criteria? Of course, he is not required to maintain any books of accounts. Simple. Then coming to another category of people who are specified professionals, professions which are specified in this particular section 44AA, maintenance of books of accounts. What are those specified professions? You don't need to by heart them, no need to, but generally you can understand also. Legal profession, lawyers, medical profession, doctors, engineers, architects, accountants like chartered accountants, cost accountants, consultants, interior decorators, information technology professionals, company secretaries, film artists. These are called specified professions. If the SSC is having any of the specified professions and gross receipts, remember that very well, it is not profit, it is gross receipts. In other words, total revenue, sales. Because it is profession, we cannot call it a sale. So we are calling it gross receipts of the profession exceed 1,50,000, that too in all the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year. Earlier it was any one of the years in the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year. Now it is all. So in the all 3 years immediately preceding the previous year, if the gross receipts of the professional exceed 1,50,000, they have to maintain books of accounts as per 44AA. What books they have to maintain? Normal things. Cash book, journal, ledger. 25 rupees exceeding bills, expenses, they have to keep copies of the bills. Any expenditure exceeding 50 rupees, they have to keep original bills. We have to always keep in mind, expenses debited to P&L are not like jokes. For each of the expenses, SC has to prove that. How can you prove that? If a scrutiny comes, how can you prove that? He needs to have bills for that. If the expenditure is individually exceeding 25 rupees itself, he needs a copy of the bill. If not, if it is 50 rupees more, 50 rupees or exceeding 50 rupees expenditure, any such small expenditure also, original bills have to be maintained. And the SSCs who are in medical profession, which means doctors, they are supposed to maintain 2 more books. What are those? One is daily case register. The second one is inventory records of drugs, medicines, etc. These 2 books have to be maintained by doctors over and above the original books. These are not the only books that they should maintain. All specified professionals should maintain books and other documents as per Rule 6F, which are cash book, journal, ledger, copies of the bills exceeding 25 rupees, original bills for exceeding 50 rupees. And doctors should maintain 2 more books, daily case register and inventory records for medicines. That's it. That is 44AA. For businesses or non-specified professions on one part and specified professionals on the other part. And for the other professionals, if the SC does not fall in above criteria, they need to maintain such books of accounts as may enable the assessing officer to compute his taxable income. So if the specified professions are there and their gross receipts do not exceed 1,50,000 in all the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year, then they don't need to maintain all these Rule 6F list. They can maintain generally any books of accounts that may enable the assessing officer to compute his taxable income. Let us apply this in an example question. We know this is a person carrying on profession as a film artist. So film artist is a specified profession that we know already. His gross receipts from profession are as under 3 years immediately preceding the previous year. So our previous year is 1920. Prior to that, 1819, 1718, 1617, 3 years. And these are the gross receipts. 1,15,000, 1,80,000, 2,10,000. Have the gross receipts exceeded 1,50,000 in all the 3 years immediately preceding the previous year? Answer is no, because during financial year 16-17 his gross receipts were only 1,15,000, which means should he maintain the books of accounts under section 44AA? What is his obligation regarding maintenance of books of accounts under section 44AA? Should he maintain all the books mentioned in Rule 6F? No need. No need of all those. But he can maintain any such books of accounts as may enable the assessing officer to compute his taxable income. Other than that, he doesn't need to maintain any specific books of accounts as mentioned in Rule 6F, because his gross receipts did not exceed 1,50,000 in all 3 years. In 2 years they exceeded, but all 3 years they did not exceed. Hence, there is no need to maintain proper books of accounts as per Rule 6F and Section 44AA. That is about maintenance of books of accounts, obligation of the SSCs. Once again, as you can observe, it is purely theoretical. There is nothing to compute here. Either you have to observe the conditions whether they are satisfied or not, and you have to tell whether books of accounts are required to be maintained or not. That's it. Another situation similar to 44AA, but which is related to audit of the books of accounts. Okay, books of accounts to be maintained or not, 44AA will tell that. But 44AB tells what types of assessees are required to get their accounts audited by a chartered accountant. Audit, which is called popularly tax audit, has to be done by a chartered accountant only. That means, in the following cases, the assessees are required to get their books of accounts audited by a chartered accountant. Naturally, this 44AB will become one of the very important sources of incomes for practicing chartered accountants. So we can call AA and AB as bread and butter of the tax practitioners. But still, the point is, this is only one part of the practice, not that chartered accountants will have only this practice. Definitely, this is one of the major areas of practice for many chartered accountants, because all these SSCs are supposed to get their books of accounts audited by a chartered accountant compulsorily according to 44AB. It is a law requirement, legal requirement. There is no option to the SSC. So, which type of SSCs are required to get their accounts audited? Who are those? The SSCs who are required to get their accounts audited are these people. First category, if the SSC is carrying on business and the total turnover of the business for the previous year exceeds 100 lakhs. 100 lakhs means 1 crore. So, if the turnover of any business during the previous year is exceeding 1 crore, they have to get their books of accounts audited. What about professionals? SSC is carrying on profession. If the gross receipts of the profession for the previous year exceed 50 lakhs, then they have to get their books of accounts audited. So, businessmen should get the books of accounts audited if their turnover exceeds 100 lakhs during the previous year. Professionals should get books of accounts audited if their gross receipts turnover more or less same. But it is because it is profession, we cannot call it sales, turnover, doesn't make sense. So we call it gross receipts. Both turnover and gross receipts are representing revenue of the SSC. So those gross receipts from the profession exceeded 50 lakhs. If so, then they have to get their books of accounts audited. And other things are same logic. If the SSC is covered by presumptive provisions like 44AE, BB or BBB, when SSC claims his income to be lower than the presumptive income, naturally he has to prove it. Of course, he has to prove it by maintaining the books of accounts also, which was already given here in point number 3. And who is going to believe that books of accounts unless they are audited? They have to be audited also by a chartered accountant. Same logic applies to others also. Same these two things. SSC is covered under 44AD presumptive taxation, who are business people. SSC is covered in 44ADA, who are professionals. All these 44AD, ADA, AE, these are all presumptive provisions. If the SSC claims that his actual income is lower than the presumptive income and his basic exemption limit has exceeded, then he has to get his books of accounts not only maintained under 44AA, also he has to get the books of accounts audited. That's all. That is about audit of books of accounts under 44AB. Normally the limits are for businessmen turnover of 1 crore, for professionals gross receipts of 50 lakhs during the previous year. For all the presumptive taxation type people, if their actual income what they are claiming is less than the presumptive income prescribed under 44 sections, then they have to maintain books of accounts also under 44A. and they have to get them audited under 44AB also. Of course, in that sense, 44AD and ADA will have requirement of books of accounts getting audited only if the income of the SC exceeds presumptive income. If the SC says his income is lower than the basic exemption limit, then there is no need of audit. So, two conditions. One, SC says that his income is lower than presumptive income. Second condition, his income is exceeding basic exemption limit. Then their books of accounts have to be getting audited under 44AB. So 44AA is about maintenance of books of accounts. 44AB is about tax audit of those books of accounts. Then what are the due dates for this audit report? 30th September is the due date. That is 30th September of the assessment year. That means for the previous year ended 2019-20, audit report has to be submitted by 30th September 2020. That is the normal due dates. By the way, because of special conditions in this year, that may get extended. That should not be written in exam and all. Those are special things. What is in law, that has to be written. Due date is 30th September for normal SSCs where audit is applicable. If audit is not applicable, then the due date for individuals is 31st July. That we know. That is for return of income filing. But if tax audit is applicable, along with the return of income, tax audit report also has to be submitted. Both have to be filed together. When that is applicable under 44AB. Anyway, if the SC has international transactions, then the due date is 30th November. If that is a very special case where the SC has some international transactions also, where he might need other countries' financials also to be clubbed or merged or consolidated with the financials of this company, then the due date is extended to 30th November. That's a special case. Normally the due date for tax audit report filing is 30th September. You have to remember them. These are the questions that will be generally asked in articles interviews also by the chartered accountancy firms. So 44AA and AB, don't look at them only from examination marks point of view. These are the general bread and butter of chartered accountants. So naturally, as students who will join articles in future, you have to know these things very thoroughly. Not just purely from exam point of view, even from real life point of view. These are very two important sections. But there is an anomaly here, particularly when we talk about 44AD, which is also related to presumptive income. We will understand that if we first look at what is 44AD. While computing the PGBP of certain small businesses, we will take income of that business or profession on presumptive basis. So these cases are those where the income is computed on pre-assumed rates. Rates is not rates of tax, that is rates of income. Certain percentage of the gross receipts or turnover is assumed to be the income of the SSC, assumed to be the profit of the SSC by law. Law will tell that. So what is the anomaly related to this tax audit and 44AD is 44AD is applicable and extended to all small businesses with a total turnover or receipts of up to 200 lakhs. In other words, if an SSC has a turnover of more than 1 crore also, but if his turnover does not exceed 2 crores, he can still choose for 44AD. Now the question comes, because his turnover has exceeded 1 crore, should he get his books of accounts audited? Because 44AB says a limit of 1 crore, 44AD says a limit of 2 crores. That is why that anomaly is removed in this second point, very important. The requirement of audit under 44AB does not apply to a person who declares the PGBP on a presumptive basis under 44AD and his total sales, turnover or gross receipts do not exceed 2 crores. If the sales are not exceeding 2 crores, then there is no need of 44AB. That means that 1 crore limit automatically now becomes 2 crores limit. But when a person adopts 44AD, if a person does not adopt 44AD, then tax audit is compulsory. But if a person adopts 44AD, he declares his income by following 44AD on a presumptive basis, then he does not need to get the books of accounts audited even though his turnover exceeded 1 crore, as long as it does not exceed 2 crores. That is an exceptional case of SSEs who declare their income on presumptive basis under 44AD. And this 44AD is applicable to whom? Only individuals, HUFs and partnership firms, but not LLPs, whose business turnover or gross receipts is not exceeding 2 crores up to 200 lakhs, including 200 lakhs. If it does not exceed, turnover did not exceed 2 crores, then they have the facility of presumptive taxation under 44AD. Okay, whether it is a facility or punishment, that depends upon the reality of the SSE. But 44AD gives that option to the SSEs. Which type of SSEs? Those whose turnover does not exceed 2 crores and who are either individuals, resident individuals, that too, HUF and partnership firms, but not LLPs. Obviously, companies are all not covered here. So, for a company, 44AD is not applicable. We have to keep that in mind. Only for resident individuals, HUFs and partnership firms, the facility of 44AD is given. And this provision does not also apply to those businesses which are in the business of plying, hiring and leasing of goods carriages. Why is that? Because for them there is a separate section called 44AE, which we will look at later. So that is why 44AD is not applicable to them, for whom anyway 44AE is applicable. That is separated from this. And not only that, this section is not applicable for a person who is carrying on any agency business and a person who is earning income in the nature of commission or brokerage. So they are not doing any other activities, simply they are getting some commission or brokerage by doing agency business. For them also 44AD is not applicable. So just commission agents will not get this benefit of 44AD. Traders are okay. Buying and selling of goods is not a problem. Any other small businesses who are individuals, HUF or partnership firm without having a turnover of more than 2 crores, they can choose, if they want to, the presumptive taxation under 44AD. And another point is also just to be noted. This scheme would not apply to the SSE who is availing exemptions under 10AA. We'll see them later, particularly related to export-oriented undertakings in the special economic zones. They have a special exemption under 10AA. If they are claiming that, they cannot claim 44AD. Also, if the SSE is claiming any deductions under Chapter 6A, which are specifically based on incomes, there are two types of deductions under Chapter 6A. Certain deductions based on expenses or investments or savings, certain deductions which are based on incomes. If the SSE is claiming any deductions which were based on incomes already under Chapter 6A, then he cannot claim 44AD presumptive taxation. However, other deductions under Chapter 6A will be available, of course, 80C to 80U, which relate to expenses or investments or savings of the SSE. Again, that also we will look at them when that chapter of deductions we will discuss. But here only we are looking at eligibility of 44AD. Which type of SSE is eligible to opt for 44AD? Turnover should not exceed 2 crores. SSE should be either a resident individual, HUF or partnership firm, not an LLP, not a company, not any other type of SSE. And SSE should not be in the business of plying, hiring or leasing of goods carriages, because anyway 44AE is applicable such SSEs. SSE should not be in the agency business earning only commission or brokerage as his income. And SSE should not have claimed exemptions under 10AA or deductions under Chapter 6A related to incomes. However, deductions related to expenses or savings or investment which were ranging from 80C to 80U shall be available. These are all conditions. Actual provision is the fifth point. This is the real point. What is the real point? What is the presumptive rate? It is not rate of tax. That might mislead you. Don't think it is rate of tax. It is not rate of tax. That is rate of income. The presumptive rate, let us say, just would be 8% of total turnover or gross receipts. That is a presumptive rate of income, that is not tax. In other words, imagine if SSE is having a turnover of 2 crores. Exactly. Is he eligible first of all? Of course, yes, he is eligible. Then how much is deemed to be his profits? 16 lakhs. 8% of 2 crores. Same way, if SC has, let us say, a turnover of only 10 lakhs. 10 lakhs is the turnover. How much will be deemed to be his income, which is profit? 8% of 10 lakhs. That would be 80,000 only. That's all. Actually, how much the income SC has earned, that nobody cares. SC would have earned really more than that or less than that. But as per 44 AD, it is presumed to be the income of the SSC at the rate of 8% of total turnover or gross receipts. And there is one more small variation here. Instead of 8%, we have to take 6% only if the turnover or gross receipts are received through banking channels other than by mode of cash. So if the SC has, let us say, certain cash sales also and certain sales through credit cards and other banking channels also, then on those receipts which are not by way of cash, which are through banking channels, the presumptive income is not 8%, it is only 6%. So once again, just for example, if you take a number, say SC has a total turnover of say 50 lakhs, in that 20 lakhs is cash sales, 30 lakhs is sales through banking channels, could be through transfers, by debit card, credit cards paid by customers, but through banking channels other than by mode of cash. So 20 lakhs by cash means on that 20 lakhs, 8% is going to be the presumptive income. On the remaining 30 lakhs, 6% only is going to be the presumptive income. The total income in that case is going to be 3,40,000 for the SSE. That is how calculations will have to be done. According to the turnover of the SSE, directly we find out his income. That's it. That's what 44 AD tells. Of course, it is not that it is compulsory to take this. It is a choice or option to the SSE. If it is beneficial to the SSE, then you can take this. This is one of the facilities that is given to small business owners under 44 AD, where they can declare their incomes on some presumptive basis rather than on real incomes, whatever they have earned. Of course, if the SSE wants to declare an amount higher than the presumptive income, are we going to stop him? Of course, nobody is going to stop him. He will be definitely welcome. He can declare as much higher income than presumptive income if he is so genuine and so honest and so contributing to the tax and exchequer of the government. He can do so. That is his choice. Higher than presumptive income means he is telling my income is higher than presumptive income. That is always welcome by the government, by the act. Of course, it is not a problem. They can do that. But can he tell his income is lower than the presumptive income? Yes, he can do that also. But then what we will tell, the law will tell, okay, is your income lesser than presumptive income? That's what you are saying. Okay, fine. But then maintain books of accounts under 44 AA. Also, get your books of accounts audited under 44 AB if your income is exceeding the basic exemption limit. So, telling an income or declaring an income more than presumptive income is not a problem. But declaring an income less than presumptive income creates obligation on the part of the SSE to maintain the books of accounts under 44 AA and getting them audited under 44 AB. Now, after giving this already 8%, 6%, finally is the profit. After that also, will there be any other deductions? No. All deductions allowable under 30 to 38 shall be deemed to have been allowed in full. No further deduction shall be allowed. No means no. Already it is a profit that law is telling. In other words, law has given a deduction of 92% and 94% in some cases. That much deduction the law has given for all the expenses which we don't know what those are. We don't need to know. Law itself has given so much of deduction already on the income, on the turnover. So there is no further deduction. This 8% or 6% is net profit, which is taxable, which is the income of the SSE, deemed to be the income of the SSE, presumed to be the income of the SSE. Directly it is the income of the SSE or PGBP actually, not the total income. The PGBP of the SSE will be straight away calculated 8% or 6% of the total turnover or gross receipts. And because already all deductions are deemed to have been allowed, no further deduction shall be allowed, no depreciation also shall be allowed. However, for the purpose of computation of closing written down value, depreciation can be calculated separately, though it is not allowed as deduction. Can WDV be calculated of the assets? That might be required, because in future, suddenly let us say the asset is sold or something happened to that. For that, the block of assets concept should be followed. It should be just calculated, that's all. No treatment is required for it, because no further depreciation is allowed. Since all deductions under 30 to 38 are deemed to have been allowed in full, no more deduction, no further deduction. That's a very important point to be noted. So straight away PGBP will be either 8% or 6% of the turnover or gross receipts of the SSE. Of course, whatever the income that we are computing, it is only business income. Is it the total income of the SSE? No. Other incomes will be there. As usual, income from house property, if it is there, it is there. Any capital gains is there, okay. Income from other sources might be there. All of them shall be added to derive gross total income. So 44 AD is not for total income of the SSE, it is only for business income of the SSE, only for PGBP computation. And as we already know, if the SSE claims to have income less than presumptive income, then 44 EAA and EAB will be applicable, which means he has to maintain books of accounts and get them audited by a chartered accountant. And one more condition is there, a kind of twist here. If a person opts for presumptive taxation scheme, if he opts it, 44 AD, he says, okay, good. In 1 year, SC has a very good profit actually in reality, but according to presumptive income, it is only 8%. Let us say he has earned a 20% rate of profit, net profit. So he has earned good profit, but it doesn't need to declare that. He can just say my profit is 8% according to 44 AD, and by the way, it is not any mistake, it is not any illegal thing. He is applying a provision of Income Tax Act, that is his right. He is not doing any black money here. As per his right, he has declared his profit to be 8% of his turnover or 6% of his turnover under 44 AD, right royally, officially, legally. But reality could be different, that he might have earned more profit. That's okay. Nothing wrong in that. That will not become black money, as long as he has declared incomes under 44 AD. But it has happened like that, actual profit is more and presumptive income is less. So happily he has claimed 44 AD benefit. Next year scene reversed, let us say. Actual profit is less, 44 AD is more. Then the SC will cry to pay higher tax on the incomes that he did not earn. Then he will say, no, I don't want 44 AD. Can he tell that? Is it like a game? He will just take 44 AD when it is beneficial. He will not take 44 AD when it is not beneficial to him. Should it be allowed? No. That is why there is a condition there that is kept. If a person opts for presumptive taxation scheme, then he is required to follow the same scheme for next 5 years. Once taken 44 AD, you have to continue to take 44 AD. That is compulsory for the next 5 years. Imagine if he failed to do so. Means after 2 years he said, no, I don't want 44 AD. Okay, fine. No problem. Then you have to continue not to opt the presumptive scheme for the next 5 years. Then onwards, whenever you discontinue to take 44 AD. So, if you take 44 AD also, you have to continue it for next 5 years. If you have opted out of 44 AD also, that opting out also will have to be continued for the next 5 years. He cannot come back to 44 AD for the next 5 years. This is another condition that is restricting or limiting the SSEs from jumping towards 44 AD and against away from 44 AD. That is also one of the important conditions, again for theoretical questions. Nothing to calculate here. Can he choose 44 AD or not? Yes or no is the only point. If once he has chosen it, he has to choose continuously for the next 5 years also. And once he has gone out, he cannot come back for the next 5 years also. So that is the last condition. But main point here is the essence of 44 AD is limit. You have to remember, those businesses with a turnover of less than or equal to 2 crores only can be claiming this 44 AD benefit if it is benefit. They don't need to claim it also. If it is not a benefit to them, then they have to just maintain books of accounts and get them audited. And most importantly, what is the amount of presumed income of the SSE? It is 8% or 6% of the gross receipts or turnover of the SSE. No further deductions can be given after that. That's it. Let us apply this as an example for understanding which is there in ICA material. So consider the following particulars to a resident individual A being eligible assessee whose gross receipts do not exceed 2 crore in any assessment years between 2021 to 22-23. Some example imaginary numbers are there. So 2021 assessment year, 21-22, 22-23, like this. His gross receipts are not exceeding 2 crores. Income offered for taxation was 14 lakhs 40,000, 15 lakhs 20,000 and 10 lakhs. How much percentage of gross receipts it is? 14 lakhs 40,000 divided by 1 crore 80 lakhs is 8%. Okay. 15 lakhs 20,000 divided by 1 crore 9 lakhs, 1 crore 90 lakhs is also 8%. That means for the assessment year 2021 and 21-22, he has offered the income as per presumptive taxation scheme under 44 AD. Yes, he did that for 2 years. Actual income we don't care. How much he offered for taxation, that is important. He used presumptive taxation and he said 8% of his turnover is his actual profit. But assessment year 22-23, by the time it reached, he said no, 8% of 2 crores. Ideally supposed to be 16 lakhs, but he said my actual income is not 16 lakhs, but my actual income is only 10 lakhs. In other words, I am not choosing 44 AD. He opted out of 44 AD. Right? So what happens here? For the assessment year 22-23, because he has not chosen 44 AD, what he has to do? First thing first, he has to maintain books of accounts under 44 AA and he has to get them audited under 44 AB because his income exceeded basic exemption limit. 10 lakhs is more than basic exemption limit. So 44 AA and AB both will be applicable. As far as assessment years 2021 and 21-22 are concerned, in both these cases, there is no need for getting the books of accounts audited. Not required. Maintaining books of accounts is different. That will be still required according to 44 AA because the conditions in 44 AA will be applicable automatically. But audit is not required for sure for those two assessment years. Assessment year 22-23, audit will be required. Books of accounts will be maintained, should be maintained by the SSE because he declared an income lower than the presumptive income of 8%. So, that is one point. Another point is, when can he again choose 44 AD? Next year just 23-24, again can he say that no, I will choose 44 AD once again? Answer is no. Baba, once you have opted out, when he has to choose once again, if he wants to choose 44 AD, he can choose only after 5 consecutive assessment years. So he will not be eligible to claim the benefit of 44 AD for the next 5 assessment years succeeding the assessment year 22-23. That means 23-24, 24-25, 25-26, 26-27 and 27-28. So all these 5 assessment years, what he has to do? He has to just give whatever his actual income is. He cannot choose 44 AD. Not possible. For the next 5 years, after the year in which he has opted out of 44 AD. So that is the provision that we are talking about in the last 10th point as explained in this example. So once you choose 44 AD, you have to continue it for 5 years. He did not do that. After 2 years, he dropped out. Then, once you dropped out, you cannot come back for next 5 years. Simple. That is the provision related to 44 AD and its continuous application for different SSEs. Now let us look at another question. Mr. Praveen engaged in retail trade reports a turnover of 1 crore 98 lakhs 50,000. Okay, less than 2 crores. For the financial year 19-20, his income from the said business as per the books of accounts computed was 13 lakhs 20,000. Retail trade is the only source of income for Mr. Praveen. Question number 1. Is Mr. Praveen eligible to opt for presumptive determination of his income for the assessment year 2021? Answer is yes. Why? Because he is an individual, first point. And second, his turnover did not exceed 2 crores. So yes, he can claim presumptive determination of his income for the previous year 19-20, assessment year 2021. Second question. If so, determine his income from retail trade as per the applicable presumptive provision. Okay. We don't know how much of these receipts are cash receipts and how much are non-cash receipts. When nothing is mentioned, we have to assume they are cash receipts. So normally if nothing is mentioned, we should apply 8%. So 1 crore 98 lakhs 50,000 is his turnover. 1 crore 98 lakhs 50,000 is the turnover. On that, 8% is presumed to be his profit according to 44 AD. Calculate that. 1 crore 98 lakhs 50,000 into 8%. How much is that? 15 lakhs 88,000. 15 lakhs 88,000. How much was his actual income according to what has computed from his books of accounts? Of course, applying PGBP provisions, that was 13 lakhs 20,000 only. According to presumptive taxation, 15 lakhs 88,000 is his income. So naturally he will cry, but we can't help it. That is his choice, whether he wants to go for actual income or 44 AD income. Then case C asks, point C, in case Mr. Praveen does not opt for presumptive taxation of income from retail trade, what are his obligations under the Income Tax Act 1961? Let us say he says, no, this is too much. I have actual profit of only 13 lakhs 20,000. So that is my income. Means he is not taking 44 AD. It's okay. Let him not take, no problem, that is his choice. But what are his obligations? Obligations are, he has to maintain books of accounts under 44 AA and he has to get those books of accounts audited under 44 AB. Those are the obligations related to point C. And what is the due date for filing his return of income under both the options? Both the options means choosing 44 AD and not choosing 44 AD. If he is choosing 44 AD, there is no calculation, nothing required. Directly 1 crore 98 lakhs 50,000 into 8%, that is 15 lakhs 88,000 is his PGBP, and he has no income as he said already in the question. Directly on 15 lakhs 88,000 profit, he will calculate whatever is his tax liability, he will pay the tax and he has to file the return of income. Because there is no tax audit obligation here, tax audit obligation is not there, even though the turnover exceeded 1 crore, but still, since the turnover did not exceed 2 crores and he has chosen presumptive taxation under 44 AD, there is no tax audit applicability if he chooses 44 AD. That is why the due date will be 31st July if he chooses 44 AD. On the other side, if he says no, not 44 AD, I will go for 13 lakhs 20,000 as my income, it's okay. But immediately because of that, he has to get the books of accounts audited. When audit has to be also done, then the deadline for filing the return of income becomes 30th September. That is the answer for fourth question. If he chooses presumptive taxation, since there is no tax audit and he is an individual, 31st July is the due date. If he does not choose 44 AD, he chooses to claim his actual income, which is lower than presumptive income, then he has to get the books of accounts audited under 44 AB, because of which the due date will be 30th September for filing the return of income. This is a procedural thing, but dates are to be remembered. That was the question given in the examinations also earlier. Very good question, covering many points. First of all, can he choose presumptive income? Yes. Which section? 44 AD. If so, what will be the amount of income that will be liable to tax or chargeable to tax? 8% of turnover, assuming all receipts are cash receipts, because the data is not there. Then, what if he does not choose 44 AD? Then naturally 44 AA and 44 AB will kick in and he has to maintain books of accounts and get them audited. What are the due dates for filing the return of income? When there is no tax audit, when he chooses 44 AD, there is no tax audit, then due date for filing return of income is 31st July. When he chooses not to have 44 AD, then tax audit will be required, which means the due date for filing the return of income will be 30th September. That is about 44 AD, one of the presumptive taxation, presumptive income sections. Then 44 ADA is also an extension of that, but difference is this is applicable to professionals. Which type of professionals we know already. whatever the notified professions we already have, that are the eligible persons, and those are all eligible for section 44 ADA. This is also presumptive basis, but just look at the number here, that is important. How much is the eligibility here when a professional can use 44 ADA as a presumptive basis of computation of his income? When the total gross receipts do not exceed 50 lakhs rupees in the previous year. That is 50 lakhs. Instead of 2 crores, here this is 50 lakhs. For 44 AD it was 2 crores for businesses. For professionals it is 50 lakhs. And look at the presumptive income also. It is not 8% or 6%. 50% of the total gross receipts is assumed to be the income of the professional. Whether we like it or not, that's what the law says. Other conditions are same. No more deductions, no more depreciation. Other things are also same. What if the SC says that his PGBP is less than presumptive income and his total income exceeds basic exemption limit? Then he has to maintain books of accounts under 44AA and he has to get them audited under 44AB. If he chooses that he will not opt for 44ADA, since his presumptive income will be deemed to be 50% of his gross receipts. Whatever the gross receipts are, 50% is deemed to be the profit or income of the SSE. Of course, looking at the percentages, 8%, 6%, and for professionals, 50% looks very high. But also we have to keep that in mind. For professionals, majorly there will not be any goods related, purchase related expenses. So mostly there will be normal overheads only. So 50% is deemed to be the profit of the professionals. You like it, take it. Don't like it, don't take it. But if you say I don't take it, then you have to get your books of accounts audited and maintain them under 44AA. That is compulsory. But the limit for 44ADA is 50 lakhs rupees turnover only, and presumptive income is 50% of gross receipts. That is 44 ADA. AD was for businesses, ADA was for professionals. Now moving on to the last section of this chapter, that is 44AE. This is also presumptive income, but for whom? For those who are in the business of plying, hiring, leasing goods carriages. In other words, transporters. The transporters, that too transporters of not passengers, goods carriages only, not passenger travel. So this section applies to them. 44AE is the presumptive section for transporters. For whom this is applicable? Of course, this section gives an idea and gives a provision related to how to estimate business income of an owner of trucks from plying, hire or leasing of such trucks. If you want to use the word truck, it's okay. Otherwise, better to use technically the word goods carriages. But main point is the scheme applies to person owning not more than 10 trucks at any time during the previous year. That is very important. The person should not own more than 10 trucks. 10 trucks is okay? Of course, yes. Up to 10 trucks it's okay. Not more than 10 trucks at any time during the previous year. Any time. Let us say there is one transporter who had 8 trucks at the beginning of the previous year. He purchased first 4 trucks. Then he sold 5 trucks. So naturally at the end of the previous year, he has only 7 trucks. Can he claim a 44AE? Answer is no, he cannot. Why? At any point during the previous year, he should not own more than 10 trucks. When he already had 8 trucks, when he purchased 4, at some point in time in the previous year, even for one day, he held 12 trucks. After that he sold 5, that's a different story, but that doesn't matter. Because he was holding more than 10 trucks. He was owning more than 10 trucks at any time during the previous year. 44AE is not applicable to him. That does not mean we are going to send him to jail or something. He is a normal businessman. Anyway, he will maintain books of accounts and all. He will submit returns according to whatever actual profit he is. Only point is, he cannot choose 44AE. That facility is not available to them. Those who had owned at any point of time during the previous year more than 10 trucks. That's it. Now coming to the presumptive income, this is something very importantly which has to be remembered. There are 2 kinds of categories that law has made here. One is heavy goods vehicle, the other one is light goods vehicle, which is other than heavy goods vehicle. So for a heavy goods vehicle, what is the presumptive income? Remember that carefully. 1,000 rupees per ton of the gross vehicle weight or unladen weight for every month or part of the month during which the vehicle is owned by the SSC in the previous year. Each word is important. Okay, heavy goods vehicle, what is a heavy goods vehicle? We'll come to that. But what is the presumptive income? It is not based on one vehicle. It is based on the weight of the vehicle, gross vehicle weight or unladen weight of the vehicle after putting the luggage in that or before putting the goods in that. Of course, before putting the goods. Only the vehicle weight we are talking, not the vehicle with goods. That means empty vehicle without any goods in that. What is the weight of that? Whatever the weight it may be. For that, 1,000 rupees per ton per month or part of the month during which the heavy goods vehicle was owned by the SSC. So even if SSC owns the vehicle for one day of a month also, that will be taken as 1,000 rupees per ton per month. So this is what you should remember for heavy goods vehicle. What is the presumptive income under 44AE? 1,000 rupees per ton per vehicle, per ton per month. So that is the point. Of course, each vehicle, how much is the weight? That should be given in the question, then only you can calculate it. Multiply that weight in tons with 1,000 rupees. Multiply that with number of months the vehicle was owned by the SSC or part of the month also. Then you get presumptive income for heavy goods vehicles. 1,000 per ton per month or part of the month. Then, what about vehicles other than heavy goods vehicles? Then it is not on the basis of weight. It is per truck, per vehicle. 7,500 for every month or part of the month during which the goods carriage is owned by the SSC during the previous year. In other words, 7,500 per month per truck there, not per ton. Heavy goods vehicle, it is 1,000 per ton per month. For a non-heavy goods vehicle, 7,500 per month per truck, not per ton. That is the difference you have to clearly identify here and remember that, very important. Questions can be asked on 44AE exclusively, separately, and they were asked also in the previous examinations. Then naturally question comes, what is a heavy goods vehicle? Any goods carriage whose gross vehicle weight is more than 12 tons, exceeds, exactly 12 tons also, it is not a heavy goods vehicle. If it exceeds 12 tons, then it becomes a heavy goods vehicle. So if it is a heavy goods vehicle, whatever that number of tons that weight is, that should be multiplied with 1,000 rupees per month or part of the month. Per ton. That's it. If it is not a heavy goods vehicle, the tons and all weight does not matter. Straight away per truck, per vehicle, 7,500 per month or part of the month will be treated or deemed to be the income of the SSC who is in the business of plying, hiring or leasing the goods carriages. Of course, if the SSC declares a higher amount than this, he is always welcome. Who is going to stop them? Then that will be considered to be his income. Other things are same. No more deductions will be given. Already this is considered to be the final profit of the SSC. That's it. Of course, if the SSC joins this scheme, he will not be required to maintain books of accounts under 44AA or 44AB. But if he says that his actual profits are lower than deemed profits, then naturally he has to maintain books of accounts under 44AA and 44AB. All things are nothing new, all same. Logic is same, conditions are same. If the SC claims lower profit than 44AE, then he has to maintain books of accounts under 44AA and AB. Get them audited under AB. Otherwise, if he chooses 44AE, there is no need of maintaining books of accounts also, there is no need to get them audited also. The calculation is very important here. No more further deductions will be given. Finally, what will be the income of the SSC or deemed to be or presumed to be the income of the SSC? In case of heavy goods vehicle, 1,000 per ton per month. In case of light goods vehicle, 7,500 per truck per month. That's all. That has to be applied here. Let us apply this section 44AE in this particular example which was there in the essay material. Mr. X commenced the business of operating goods vehicles on 1/4/2019. That means freshly started business during our previous year only. beginning of the year. He purchased the following vehicles during the previous year 1920. Compute his income under section 44AE for the assessment year 2021. Would your answer change if the goods vehicles purchased in April were put to use only in July? See, that is another confusing and unnecessary trap. This 44AE never used the word put to use. The word used here is for the month or part of the month during which the vehicle is owned by the SSE. In other words, even though it is put to use or not put to use, it was kept in garage only, we don't care. Ultimately, the answer is still going to be same. It is not going to be different. But what is the answer, that we have to find out. So first we have to classify these vehicles into heavy goods vehicles or light goods vehicles or non-heavy goods vehicles. So let us do that. We have to do that in a statement normally, but I am showing only the calculation. So gross vehicle weight in kilograms is 7,000, means it is not a heavy goods vehicle. It is a, let us call it a light goods vehicle. This is also a light goods vehicle. This is also a light goods vehicle. This is also light goods vehicles. And these are heavy goods vehicles. Because the gross vehicle weight should exceed kilograms. 15,000 kilograms means 15 tons, that is more than 12 tons. Up to 12 tons there is no difference. That is first point. Second point, look at the number of trucks. 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1. What is the total? 3 plus 3, 6 plus 4, 10. It did not exceed 10. So no problem. 44AE can be claimed because the total number of trucks at any point of time in the year did not exceed 10 number of trucks. So condition related to 44AE is satisfied. Then all that what we need to do is multiplication. So what should we do here? 2 into 7,500 per month or part of the month. So April it was purchased, means how many months naturally? During the entire previous year, 12 months. So 2 into 2 trucks, 7,500 per month because they are light vehicles, into 12 months. That will be 1,80,000 rupees. Do these calculations. Another scenario, 6,500 means we don't need this. Actually, once we already identified these are light goods vehicles, this weight is useless. Just don't look at them. These are light goods vehicles, that's all. That means number of vehicles only matter. Once again, one vehicle into 7,500 into when this was purchased, March 2020 means only 1 month. Part of the month also is considered to be 1 month. So 1 month it is used. So 7,500 is the presumed income from that. Same way, 3 into 7,500 into how many months? July. July means how many months? How many months are not there? April, May, June are not there. From July onwards, there will be 9 months. So do the calculation. 7,500 into 3 vehicles into 9 months. 2,02,500. Then, this is also light goods vehicle. So same 7,500 per truck per month or part of the month. So January it was purchased, means how many months? 3 months. January, February, March of 2020. So 7,500 into 3. That will be 22,500. So this is all light goods vehicles. Now heavy goods vehicles. Heavy goods vehicles will not be on the basis of number of trucks only. It will be on the basis of weight of the truck also. Okay, 2 trucks into, here what should happen? Per ton 1,000 rupees. So how many tons each vehicle had? 15 tons. So 15 into 1,000 rupees into how many months? August, September, October, November, December, then 3 means 8 months. So per ton 1,000 rupees. 15 tons means 15,000 rupees. Like that 2 trucks. Like that 8 months. 2,40,000 rupees is the presumptive income for those trucks. Then 1 truck only here. Of course, here into 15 into 1,000 is common because 15 tons is the weight of this vehicle also. But number of months, how many? February it was purchased, means 2 months. So 15,000 into 2. That will be 30,000. So after doing all these calculations and doing a total, you will get the total presumptive income of this Mr. X. So 1,80,000 plus 7,500 plus 2,02,500 plus 22,500 plus 2,40,000 plus 30,000. 6,82,500 is deemed to be his income, irrespective of his turnover, irrespective of his profit, actually how much he made, we don't care. 6,82,500 is presumed to be his profit, presumed to be his income. That will be his PGBP. But really how much profit he made, we don't know. If he really made more than this, then he'll silently take 44 AE, then he doesn't need to maintain books of accounts and get them audited. But on the other side, reality is that if he made very less money than this, then he has to maintain books of accounts also and get them audited also to claim his actual income is lesser than presumptive income. That is section 44AE. So 44AE is for transporters, ADA is for professionals, AD presumptive income, these three are for businesses. 44AB is a tax audit for everybody. 44AA is books of accounts to be maintained, that is for everybody. And other sections what we have discussed today are different, related to deemed profits or deemed incomes and exchange rate fluctuation as well as real estate transactions. With these provisions, we can conclude all the theoretical and conceptual discussion related to the chapter of profits and gains of business or profession, and we'll continue to solve some questions which can be asked in the examinations from this topic in the next session. Till then, take care, bye bye, thank you very much.